Hello, Bob Wells here, and welcome to another episode of the Undercurrent Stories podcast, and where I invite you to take a pause from the noise and join me as we explore the hidden depths of the human experience. Have you ever felt like there is a dormant, creative part of you just waiting to get out? Something you buried years or even decades ago because life got in the way. Careers, family, commitments, the daily grind, all very important. But it's so easy to push out real passions to the back burner while we go about our everyday life. Sometimes, though, life makes those big decisions for us. My guest today spent decades in a demanding corporate career that had nothing to do with making music. He carried melodies spinning around in his head for over 20 years, but reality meant those dreams had to wait. Then, in his middle age, redundancy hit. Instead of seeing it purely as an ending, it ignited something that had been lying dormant inside him. It gave him the permission and the time to step into his studio, pick up his instruments, and finally give those melodies a voice. Today he writes, plays every instrument, records, and produces entirely on his own terms. In fact, the piece of music you can hear playing softly in the background right now, that isn't our stock audio, that is Ben's own creation. A piece of his inner world that spent 2 decades waiting for its moment to be heard. So today we're going to be talking about creativity, reinvention, and what it actually takes to unlock that latent spark inside yourself. So I want to ask you today, what is that creative thing inside of you that's waiting to get out? Hello and welcome to Undercurrent Stories, Ben.
Hello, glad to be here.
Good to have you on. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got this interest in music?
Sure. Well, I'm, as you said I was middle-aged, right? So,
well, do you know what? I was going to say, you can say it, but I thought, yeah, I'll change that.
I'll go with that. It's one of those things in life you have to accept, right? It always reminds me, when you click on one of those, what is your age drop downs online? I now have to scroll down a few to get them.
Yeah.
Anyway, to answer your question, so I have had a passion for music since day dot, and the primary reason for that was, I guess, my dad was my inspiration, right? So he was in rock bands when I was very young and growing up in North London. I was born in Hornsey, which is probably quite close to Highbury, but somehow I ended up being a Spurs fan. That's a completely different story. But my dad played in rock bands. He played in a band called Slowbone that supported Fleetwood Mac and other bands like that when I was much younger. And I remember I always had this picture of him on my mantelpiece at home, long hair, very skinny, tight white T-shirt, in his 20s, playing this beautiful Fender Paisley Telecaster bass, which he ridiculously sold a few years ago. And I always chastise him every time I meet him for that. But I guess he was my inspiration as I was growing up. And then through the years, various bands, but music always stayed on the back burner behind the career. But I guess, we'll talk about that in a minute.
So when redundancy hit you, did it come as a shock or was there a sense of relief where you sort of thought, well, actually, now's the time to have a look at the music?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, look, if redundancy hits you and if it hits anyone, it is a shock in a way. And part of the reason for that is because it's a rejection. You cannot take it, you can't help but take it personally, despite whatever reason it is you are given. And very often companies will say, look, we're not profitable. We need to slash the highest salaries, the last people in, with the strategic headcount we need to reduce. It was actually my 4th in my industry of customer experience. So you would have thought I'd be getting used to it. But no, it hurts. However, I think you're quite right and perceptive to say it in life, sometimes a door closes, another opens. What it gives you is a bit more time and time to try to build something. And I looked at the things, and again, I'm the age I am, I looked at what I hadn't achieved in life rather than what I had and thought, I'll always regret it if I don't put some serious time and effort into creating music. And so that's where this journey of mine really, the musical journey, started when I was made redundant from my last company in May last year.
And how did your family react when you mentioned to them that you were going to be having a go at music?
Supportive, a little unsure, probably. How do you monetize it, right? Where's the money coming from? The music industry, if you consider it to be this one gargantuan holistic beast, is very, very difficult to penetrate at any level, especially at my age, you might say. But then I'm not going for your typical chart-topping target audience, right? So my style of music is very much jazz, fusion, instrumentals, if you can get your head around what that means. But very melodic, very structured. So sometimes when you say the word jazz to people, it sort of confuses them and makes them think, oh God, I won't be able to, that won't be to my palate. But that's not the case. As with anything, there are extremes. So I guess when I put this in front of my family and said, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I've always wanted to do. I've had melodies spinning around my head for years and years and years. Only ever been able to manage to sing them into my phone or something, or record them on an old desktop software package that I used to have, but never really took it in the direction that I really wanted to do. And so when you get that time to really focus on it all, the quality of what you produce just improves exponentially, because of course that's all you're doing. You're sitting down and focusing on it. And I'm very tenacious and goal driven. So for me, it was a brand new project with a brand new outlet for my creativity.
And when you were in your career, Ben, were you still playing music?
Yes, but really on the back burner. I mean, the best example of this is way back in 2006, I was in the career which has been my career for the past couple of decades, which is customer experience management. And I was an account manager for some serious big brands that you would know. So it's very demanding, traveling around the country an awful lot. Not Europe at that time. I did later on in my career, but around the UK, visiting all my clients. And at the same time, in, believe it or not, a metal band called Last Stop Chinatown, and we were touring. So, I spend the day driving around the country, seeing my clients, making sure they're all fulfilled and our contracts delivered. And then in the evening, racing to meet my bandmates who all based around Northampton to either practice, rehearse, or gig. And then sometimes had to squeeze in some tours and take time off work. So toured a few times in the UK and France and Germany. So that was quite difficult, but at the same time, we all have our passions. We all have our need for creative outlet. And that was great. I loved it. But eventually, reality bit. And I had more kids and had to stop touring and stop gigging and stop banding. So again, the music was parked for many years until just recently.
And did you have your mainstay throughout all this was your jazz and funk? Was that still at the forefront while you were playing the metal?
It's odd because, very often when you're musical, you're not just interested in one type of music, as your taste can be quite eclectic. And I think as I exposed myself more to metal and rock, which had always been in there, my dad's whole thing was, really sort of heavy. He used to play big, heavy precision basses. So it was always like big, fat, low end. So I grew up with that kind of rock DNA in there. When I was in that band and we were playing what I would call melodic heavy rock, so almost bordering on metal, but not quite as screamy and as shouty as you might be familiar with, it meant suppressing that kind of jazzy edge. And I can remember in sound check once I did something audacious, like I played quite a jazzy bass line or even, slap bassed or something like that. And our lead singer turned around and gave me, what they might call the Paddington stare, right? The Paddington hard stare, which is like, no, don't.
Not doing that again.
Yeah, we're not doing that. So I had to compartmentalize my preferences and just sort of get into a different mindset. And musically, that actually means playing rhythmically a very different way.
And for any listeners that perhaps want know a little bit more about music and your influences and the style, are there any artists that you could say you've been influenced by and you could actually listen to and see sound?
Yeah. Yes. So I'll just quote you what I would probably tell anyone now as of today, what my influence is. Actually, no, I won't. I'll go back a little bit through history. So I grew up with biggest influence is probably Level 42 because, the minute I saw Mark King, if you don't know him, go look him up, please. Thousands of fantastic YouTube videos playing the most amazing, technically fast slap bass that I'd ever seen. He used to play some really cool bass guitars like Status Graphite and Alembic with LEDs up the neck. I remember thinking, that's cool. That's much cooler than being a guitarist, right? Or a drummer or anything else. So that inspired me. So level 42. Then I really got into musicality, the musicality of it. So the technicality of it, really talented musicians. So I started listening to Weather Report, Stanley Clarke, more on the jazzy side. Return to Forever, Chick Corea's Return to Forever. More on maybe the mainstream rock commercial side. Bands like Toto, believe it or not. Some fantastic 80s albums in there, including Toto 4, which everybody knows. And then moved through the years and really got into the jazzy side of things. So bringing it all up to date, today I listen to George Benson, always have done, always will. Larry Carlton, Lee Ritenour, Foreplay, a jazz supergroup called Jazz Funk Soul, which is made up of Everett Harper, Jeff Lorber, and Paul Jackson. Paul Jackson's on my Instagram, by the way. So once you start networking in this industry, you do get to know people. And then actually just recently I've discovered and just went and seen at Ronnie Scott's in London and met a fantastic German jazz guitarist called Torsten Goods. And again, I'd encourage our listeners on here, if you're going to look up anybody and watch a little bit of their guitar style and how he's bringing jazz into the mainstream, go watch Torsten Goods. His technique is excellent and he's got a great voice as well, but it's a very melodic pop oriented version of jazz that I listen to. So there's some really great influences in there.
So I can see hanging up on your wall, Ben, not just a bass guitar, but some guitars. So I was quite interested to hear that you play all instruments, the guitars, the keyboards, the drums. Yes. Tell us about how you do that.
Well, I'm self-taught and it all comes from, when growing up as a kid, hearing all these things. Yeah, I saw Mark King, a great bass guitarist, and was influenced and inspired by him, but then also thought, how do you make all these other sounds around that sort of foundational layer of the bass guitar? So over the years, I kind of self-taught. Yeah, and as you can see here on the wall, I got numerous guitars and you can't see over here on my right, a whole rack of about 10 or 12 more of them. And I interchange them depending on what sound I want. But I had to create the fuller sound, the studio sound. So yeah, that meant, learning if you hit something, how to do that a lot better than just hitting it, right? And making all of the sounds come together. So teaching myself, drums, on guitar, again, I really developed my own style, which I guess is a little bit unique. A lot of people will use a plectrum, to pick the notes individually. I tend to prefer a thumb pick here. I've got one on my thumb right now, which tends to be a little bit of a slower technique. You can't pick as fast, but actually I prefer the strike on the string and the hardness of the note that then creates. So that's a little bit unique, I guess. Not a lot of people will do that. But then I taught myself also, the rudiments of piano, and I do it all by ear. So I can't read music. I never have. I don't really read tab from guitar. I guess I'm lucky and I'm blessed a little bit that, when I hear a song, I can sit down straight away and pick out the notes of the chord from the song. So I can construct chords with the individual notes. I can hear them playing. And that's why I never write music. This is going to sound very cliche, Bob, but I dream music most of the time. I'll dream a composition and it'll be fully formed in my head, fully orchestrated.
Just to wait there. You dream music while you're asleep?
Yeah, it happens to me all the time. I'll be at 2 a.m, a full composition will sound in my head and it'll wake me up. And I've got two choices at that point. Am I too tired and just go, oh, screw it and go back to sleep? Or do I get up and try and capture that somehow so I don't lose it? And I would say today I now do much more of the latter than the former. And the reason is because when I haven't been bothered and got out of bed and somehow tried to capture that, in the morning I wake up and I can never remember that melody. It's gone. And
I'm just interested to know about that, because I remember reading something about Paul McCartney dreaming the melody for Michelle.
Oh,
you're in with the geniuses there.
Oh, wow.
So when you say you capture it, I mean, are you up for the rest of the day, up for the rest of the morning doing it, or do you just write the melody down? How does it work?
What I do is, and sometimes it makes me laugh when I listen back to these, I grab my phone, I go to the notes record, the voice notes recorder app that we typically all have on our phones. Yeah. It's meant to be used for like business notes and business meetings. And I'll hum the melody, whistle or sing the melody into the phone. But what I try to do is capture various parts of the melody that I can hear in my head. So I'll hum the bass line, whistle the melody that sits on top of the bass line, and maybe some of the other fillers around the edge that I can also hear ringing in my head. And the reason I do that is because sometimes if you only listen back to one part that you've recorded on your phone, you can't get the melody again. You can't, even though it's the notes, you think, what was I thinking? I can't hear the other parts, which made it interesting enough for me to want to record that. And so I do delete those if it doesn't make sense to me. But sometimes, because this is in the middle of the night, it means I have to go downstairs, do it quietly in the corner of the lounge so I don't wake anyone up. All right. So and then the next morning I'll listen back to it and I'll go, oh, wow. Yeah, I remember that now. And then it all comes back, because listening back to the voice note was a trigger for the song that I heard in my head. That's why I'm self-taught, because what I had to do then was not songwrite, but somehow translate the music that I heard into digital format to create the music that we all stream today. So that's why I had to learn everything on my own and not rely on a band of musicians to do it for me. So yeah, that's my method. I don't write songs, I dream songs. I guess it's a bit of a weird way of getting to a produced track.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation that when you were working intensely in your career, you even had sort of songs in your head then.
Yeah, and funnily enough, I've just released an EP, but I've got another EP queued up. I guess this is the way music works now, right? We don't, unlike bands that used to go into the studio specifically to record an album and then release it. Actually, as musicians now, because of social media, we're busy all the time. So I'd had a melody in my head kicking around, which I've called Nomad Coast, for about 20 years, and only just managed to record it. And I know it was 20 years ago because I found the old sound files in a folder that I kept on my computer when I changed them over just recently, and listened back to it. It has an acoustic guitar part with a kind of reggae jam going on in the background. It sounds slightly odd, but it's still quite jazzy. When I played the final product to my wife the other day after I'd had it mastered in the US, she said, "That's the most modern thing that you've done recently," which I took as a compliment. And I said, well, funnily enough, that's not modern at all. You know, that's been kicking around in my head. So yeah, I'd had it kicking around 20 years and recorded that one. And sometimes, you know, some of these melodies you don't lose. You know, you can always get back to. Maybe there's a part of the brain that goes into and is preserved like a memory. Some of them disappear, some of them stay. So I try to almost like cathartically get them out and get them into digital, so you have a finished product to hear what my brain's been creating over all these years.
Do you ever come into the studio not with any ideas and just sort of sit down and think, right, what shall I do today? Or do you already have to be inspired?
I have to be inspired. Yeah, that's the way it works for me. What I will do is I'll come in here and I'll pick up a guitar and I'll just play something on a guitar, of course, because as guitarists, as you know, the instrument in itself is inspirational, right? You want to pick it up and play it, especially if it's an instrument you really love. And I'm always, you know, getting new basses in and out. You know, a lot of these up on the wall next to me are fairly new. The Epiphone here isn't, but these two are the basses either side of it. So I'll come in here and I'll just pick them up and I'll play something, and maybe that will give me a little bit of inspiration. Or I'll have a fragment of a melody and I'll think, you know, how do I expand that out? So I can, you know, work on and develop something from just a single idea. So I can often do that. But I would say for the most part, there's usually some sort of kicker that gets me in here, you know, that gets my juices flowing, that makes me want to come in and create something. I've learned about myself that I'm a creative. And as a creative, you get very frustrated if you can't create, if you don't have an outlet, if it gets bottled up and you get caught up into the mundanity of life, you know, the 9 to 5, the rigmarole of the school run and doing the shopping and doing the washing and doing the ironing and all those very pragmatic things, that if you don't have that creative outlet, you get very frustrated. And I'm also neurodiverse. So I think I need a real outlet for my creativity. Otherwise that causes, you know, kind of like negative triggers elsewhere in my life as well. That I have to be very conscious of and manage quite carefully.
Tell us about how your working day is now as a musician. So,
it's a good example of what I'll do today after this call, right? I have objectives in mind. I'm very target led, very objective. You know, I always think of what will my final product be? So I've got a couple of things I'm working on. I mentioned earlier on that I've got an EP queued up, which I'll probably release in a few weeks' time after the PR for this one has sort of moved through the process a little bit. So my process for today will be to refine some elements I'm not quite happy with on the last master that I got back from the US on a track I'm working on. It's a really good track that I really like. I'm really pleased with this one. It's called The Other Me. But there's some guitar parts in it I'm just not quite happy with. They're not cutting through. And I can hear a problem with a sort of background melody that I want to fix. It's a process, right? It's iterative. And you become a little bit more, probably more focused on the detail as you start learning your trade and learning your craft. Then after that, I'll park that and I'll give myself a couple of hours to work on that one. Then I'm going to re-record some guitar parts for a cover of West End Girls I've recorded, believe it or not, the Pet Shop Boys track, which you might think that's not jazzy at all, but actually it is. I recorded that one because part of what I'm aiming for in my music now is for opportunities in TV, media and film, what we call sync placement, sync library placement. And you work with music supervisors on call, ad hoc, on demand, who need a piece of music to fulfill a certain part of a TV show or a movie, for example. And one of the briefs in my sync network came up the other day was a cover of West End Girls by the Pet Shop Boys. And I thought, you know what? I think I can break that down into a really nice sort of quite catchy, melodic, jazzy, but up-tempo version of the same. So I worked on that last weekend, turned around a version of that in 36 hours and submitted it. But as is always the case with us perfectionists, I'm listening back to it thinking, there's some bits I can do better there. And maybe I'll evolve that one out and it can become a track on a future EP. So I tend to have, to answer your question, I tend to have a very structured day, goals, objectives. I have a time frame within which to work, don't we all? Life returns to us at some point in the day and I have to get on with my responsibilities as a parent and a husband. But I'll spend the rest of the day working on those pieces to see where I go with them.
I'd like to know about the actual laying down of the tracks, the recording process. Could you just tell us a little bit about how you start?
Yeah. So, and actually my process here has become quite consistent. And I think if you're a recording musician, efficiency is important, because otherwise you procrastinate. My process is this. I open my DAW, my desktop audio workstation, which in my case is Studio One. Lots of people use other different types of recording software. And what I'll do is with the song idea that I have, maybe one of those dreamt tracks or those evolved tracks that I talked to you about before, I lay down a very basic rhythm pattern, literally even just a click drum pattern, maybe bass drum and snare. No hi-hat, no cymbals, no nothing, just a basic rhythm pattern. I'll then put in some idea of the sense of the chord melodies that I want, typically piano. So no bass, no guitar just yet. And what that gives me is a framework. I'll then take some notes. So I'm very old fashioned. I have a notebook here right next to me called Home Recording. And I'll take some notes and I'll think about, what I want to do there in terms of timing. So what BPM, what beats per minute do I want? Do I want it to feel slightly laid back? If so, I'll go low tempo. Do I want it to feel a bit more sort of radio friendly, you might say, therefore I'll go a bit more up tempo. Then I'll start to add the detail. So I'll start to add things like the little fillers around the side, the hi-hat track in the background. And I record in MIDI, which again, if people aren't familiar with that, that's kind of the industry standard recording, the language that instruments use to talk to each other, then record digitally. So I'll be able to go back, correct, refine, increase volume, decrease volume, even change digital instrument if I want to, if I'm not happy. I have a bunch of preferred software that I use. So I'm a big fan of a keyboard synth package called Keyscape, which was made by Spectrasonics. And if you're interested in this type of thing, I'd encourage you to look it up. These guys spent 10 years traveling around the world collecting vintage keyboards and vintage synths and pianos and instruments, took them into their workshop and got artisan experts in to rebuild these instruments, even changing things like the felt on the piano hammers, and then recorded them all, sampled them all, and put them into this fantastic package called Keyscape, which is kind of my default go-to for the piano sound.
So does it include instruments like the original mellotrons?
instruments like that. So, for example, and the one that everybody loves in Keyscape the most is a Fender Rhodes style keyboard. And all kind infinite variations around that, chorus version, a distorted version, what they call the suitcase version, which is literally where the keyboard on tour used to be just folded out of its own suitcase and set up on stage. All of that stuff's in there, and they are, when you play them, it takes you back to the old sort of 60s, 70s, 80s pop tracks that we used to hear, because they're all simulations of the same thing. And actually, this is maybe going to sound strange, but the sound of the instrument you're using can inspire the evolution of the track that you're working on as well. What direction do I want to take that in? Because of the software and the instruments and my age as well, which keeps coming up in this conversation, doesn't it? I keep raising it. It probably has influenced the sound of the style of the music that I would have anyway. Right? It's maybe sort of leaning more towards what they might call adult contemporary yacht rock, right? That sort of, it's acceptable by everybody of a sort of age, a minimum age. So my process involves kind of targeting sounds like that. What I've also found is that when I've got to a point where some of the instruments, I'll go back and re-record some of the others. So, I mentioned to you at the start that I'll lay down a basic drum track and then get the basic piano chords in. Actually, I'll go back and then redo the entire drum track back over the top of the other stuff. So I could almost write this down as a linear process. Start with the basics, add some filler and detail, then at the end of the process, refine. And then it's all about mixing. And mixing is an art in and of itself, as I've come to learn.
Do you find that sometimes it's good to go away from your workload and come back a few days later to the same thing and you see it with different eyes?
Oh, yes, very much. I guess there's a term for this, which I'm not familiar with. Someone will know, but it's almost like overexposure, right? The more times you listen to a piece of music, the less you hear it. That's probably not an original thing to say, but it's true. You can't hear it anymore. You're too blind to it. If I leave it a couple of days, which I rarely do, but sometimes I have to, something comes up, or I go away for something and then come back again. Well, this is true of the masters, actually, that I send off to the guy that I use in the US. Once I've sent my final mix to the guy in the US, I deliberately don't listen to that track again, because I kind of don't want to. The only version I then want to hear is the mastered version that's coming. I get quite excited about it, and it takes them a couple of days to turn it around. When it comes back, I hear it all over again, like it's new. And this is going to sound crazy, but sometimes I even forget how the track goes, because it's so new and I've turned it around. Sometimes I forget, how's that song going again? I can't remember. And then it comes back and I go, oh yeah, wow, yeah, I really like that bit. Or, ooh, I can't hear the guitar enough. That's just happened with a track that I got back yesterday. I said it earlier on, the other me. The guitar part's too quiet. And I should have known that in the mix, right? Because I was listening to it too much. I unheard it, couldn't hear it anymore. And I think this is maybe a human brain thing. You have to step away, you have to come back, and then you can hear it with a whole new, fresh set of ears and be a lot more judgmental over it. Yeah.
I have to do a quick shout out to Tim Snaith, who we both know. Thank you, Tim. I love your music. We've had particularly hot weather here in the UK over the last few days. Yeah. And it's almost like a bit of therapy for it. It's very, very chilled, very laid back. Certainly the tracks I've heard so far. So it's great music. We're obviously going to be putting the details of your music in the show notes along with your socials.
Yeah.
What is your main goal out of all this? Are you happy just sort of releasing EPs and getting people to buy them? What's your main goal long term?
To turn this into something where, and I mean, what's that phrase, right? If you enjoy what you do, you'll never work another day again, right? So I'm at kind of that tipping point where the time now invested in this is opening doors. It's podcast being one, right? So you have conversations with people, you spread your network. I would like to continue producing the music that I'm producing, because it's a version of me. It's what's up here, has to come out somehow, and for people to enjoy it. Yes, monetize that, absolutely. We all need to earn our living. But I would love to see and hear my music placed, as I mentioned earlier on, in some form of ad, TV, media, or movie. And the reason is because we don't just create music to make money or live off it. We create music because it's a product, right? It's a thing. When you listen to a piece of music that you've finished and it's been mastered and you're happy with it, you do have to remind yourself, I did that. That's pretty cool, right? Not everybody can do that. You do have to give yourself a pat on the back every now and then. Other people do, of course, as you have just said, and thank you for that. You've enjoyed the music, and that's absolutely what I want from all of this. But sometimes you have to remind yourself, I did that. That was super cool. Time I invested is worth it. So I'd love to hear my product, my output, my creations in another form of media, entertaining other people. Because I write jazz rock instrumentals and fusion instrumentals, they're instrumentals, which means that they could work quite well in visual media, right? As either backing music, transitional music. You could imagine two people sitting down meeting in a bar with something that I created as the kind of background track to that. Maybe some summer vibe music. Maybe some of those reality TV shows. I'm going to be pitching to a music supervisor on Wednesday this week in the US again. And the track that I put forward to him is another brand new one off my next EP, which is called Heads or Tails. And it's a very up-tempo, well-structured jazz rock track with a classic kind of samba Latino piano break in the middle. And I'd sit there thinking, that break in the middle, that could work as a piece of music on its own, in a TV show. So I guess my goals would be continue creating what I create, continue to monetize it something, continue to give people something that they will enjoy and is a bit different. It's a hybrid of a lot of things. And, continue the success on this journey that I've started, because otherwise, what's the point having the ability to produce this output, but not really do anything with it? So yeah, there's a bit of kind of like self-satisfaction in there as well.
Your music is instrumental. Have you considered any collaborations? And when I say collaborations, I mean generally collaborations with vocalists.
Yes. Now, interestingly, I mentioned that I'm going to be pitching to a music supervisor on Wednesday. I did the same thing a couple of weeks back with a very, very well-known music supervisor based in the US. And he dialed in early to our call from his beach condo in Maui. I think he got up at 6 a.m. and was just due to go surfing, but spoke to a few of us just first. And I played him the first track from my first album. It's a kind of big jazz rocker called Slick. And the reason I chose that song is that I felt I owed it to that song, right? That was the one that really sort of got me into all of this. So I recorded that a couple of years ago now, but it only came out on my solo album in January this year because it took me that long to pull 10 tracks together. And I saw him nodding because he's listening as we're sort of talking online. I saw him nodding along to the beat and I thought, okay, that's good. I've got him there. And he said, yeah, it's good song structure. Have you considered vocals? Now, he knew it was an instrumental before he heard it, but his feedback was, you've got the basic song structure there. For this maybe to be more commercially viable, you've got to consider a vocalist on top of it. And I take, I'm not precious about these things at all. Yes, I produced an output. Yeah, I got a track, produced there, but I've got to listen to the expert. And what he's really trying to give me is a kind of a foot up, right? He's saying, you get some vocals behind that. I can probably do something with that. We can probably put it somewhere because it's lively, it's energetic, it's big, it's rocky. Yeah. The one thing that's missing, and this is the one thing with instrumentals, that if you are an instrumentalist, you have to remember vocals typically, the human is used to listening to a story told in a song through a vocal part. So the story of the song comes through the vocals. With instrumentals, we have to tell the story using the instrument and using the notes. So this is why some jazz instrumentals can end up being quite flowery and complex, lots of all up and down the fretboard. I tend to think keep things a little bit simpler. You can still tell a story in an instrumental with a simpler melody and probably something a little bit more accessible. I tend to regale now against all these Instagram videos, which seem to be a competition in who can play stuff fastest and more complicated than anyone else. I take a step back and say, nah, simplify, right? Play the note, let the note sustain. Just take it, just, slow the pace down a little bit. Not the BPM of the song, just what you're trying to achieve with the story that you're telling with your notation. So to answer your question, collaborations are entirely possible once you start opening the doors in this industry. The more people you get to know, the blending of styles can be quite interesting, right? Who should I work with? Should it be someone of a similar mindset to me, jazz, rock, fusion? Or just go completely left field and work with someone in country and western, or maybe someone in rap and R&B. And actually, those doors have opened recently. I've made some connections with people where we're starting to have the first conversations about collaborations. And there's some royalty stuff to sort out there, but do the paperwork up front and then you can create the art later, as they say. Yeah. So, yeah.
So if we've got any listeners that would like to do what you do, they'd like a career in the music industry, what would you suggest?
So first thing is just make a start, right? You're going to have to find time. Yes, there's the whole thing about what technical gear you have to buy, software packages, things like that. I guess, and maybe my answer to this question today wouldn't have been the same even 3 months ago, but it is today. What I would say is resist the temptation to get AI to do it for you. And the reason that's important is because as I scroll through my Instagram feed or my Facebook feed, every third post or story is, look what I just did with AI, or click here now to buy this AI package that will write and, construct a whole song for you. That if you're a hobbyist, great, go for it. If you're not, then avoid it like the plague, because commercially that is a big legal loophole problem right now. And the reason is because who do you accredit as the source for the song construct if it ever came to a legal challenge over all of this? So the music industry is avoiding AI produced music like the plague at the moment. I don't know how long that will sustain for, until someone works out some legal way of accommodating this. But at the moment, you can use AI as a tool to help you maybe organize your music, but not to record it and produce it in itself. So if you're just starting out in all of this, I'd say, whatever your instrument is, keyboard, glockenspiel, voice, maybe a singer, refine your craft through practice. Practice makes perfect. Network as much as you can in the industry. Avoid clickbaity type posting and stuff like that, because it's not all about clicks and views on social media. Maybe invest a little bit in the technical aspect of it, in that you do probably, if you don't want to go and pay someone in a studio, if you can't afford to go to a studio, you can acquire your own home software package. As I mentioned earlier on, I use Fender Studio One. There are all kinds out there, loads of different types, PreSonus, Ableton, numerous ones. Look them up. They'll have really good UIs. And literally you can start getting excited pretty quickly by just plugging into these things, recording something and playing yourself back and going, oh, that's me. I did that. And from there, you can build on it. And it's a steep learning curve. You'll be learning the technical aspect of music production, the do's and the don'ts. And there are courses out there on this, free ones, free YouTube videos, watch YouTube, it's a little bit like any topic. Once you get into it, consume it, right? Really absorb it. There's tons of advice out there, both good and bad. But maybe, avoid the temptation of just saying, hey, AI, take my vocal track and duplicate it 5 times over to create some vocal harmonies, and then add some bass and then add some drum. Don't go down that route, because it's not as fulfilling as creating the final product yourself, just through rolling your sleeves up and getting stuck in. Does that all make sense?
It does. One thing I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation is that I found when we spoke the other day, your story quite inspiring, very inspiring, in fact. And I was sort of thinking that we might have some listeners out there, and they could be in their early 50s. Say they've done their career, they've brought their family up, but they've got an urge to do something creative. Now, it may not be music; it could be art. It could be something entirely different, like sculpture or something. What would you say to them? I mean, obviously, you in a way for you, it was a bit easier because you got made redundant. I'm not saying that was a good thing, but it sort of forced your hand a little bit. What about somebody who's perhaps in their sort of mid to late career? What would you say to them?
Well, I guess if you're in your mid to late career and you're maybe thinking then, as you have just said, what's going to happen when I wind that down, when I'm less. I mean, it might be a corporate role, right? You could be really, really sucked into it, and maybe you're at a senior level because of the age range. Again, you've earned your chops, you've moved up through the company, but you've got to think of, what's next for me, and you have a creative outlet, creativity to yourself. It is a passion that you can follow and that you can consume and absorb everything you can that's around you in your given or preferred field. I think maybe the most important thing is so time is something that a lot of us don't have. And with anything that involves creativity, this is something I don't think my family get. I can't just come in here and immediately create the thing I want to create in a 30-minute or 45-minute window, a gap in between doing something. Sometimes you sit down and the ideas don't come, or you just can't play that solo because you're not warmed up enough. Or it's too late in the day and you're too tired and the brain synapses are just not firing anymore. You've just already been at it all day, or your eyes are sore because you're looking at the screen. You have to create the time to be able to allow the ideas to flow. And sometimes that might not come, for an hour or two into your session. I can think of many times when I've been sitting here for hours, trying to achieve a certain part. And then I'll do something maybe even almost unintentionally, like by accident. And it'll happen and I'll go, that's it. That's what I either wanted to do, or I didn't even know I wanted to do that, but now I've heard it. It's great. So I'm going to put that down and that's going to become that part of the track. That doesn't happen for a while into your creative day. And if you really care about the subject that you want to pursue, or the sort of passion that you've now developed as you approach the end of your career, then you're never really going to enjoy it, because it will be snatched moments, and snatched moments don't really give you anything. It all becomes very fractured. There are a couple of tracks on my first album, Solo, where I can remember I had to record and produce the whole thing in snatched moments. I remember recording a guitar solo in between two meetings at work one time. And it's a decent guitar solo, but weirdly, every time I hear that guitar solo on that track, I think immediately of the meeting that I was just about to have after that. And I remember who it was with and what it was about, because we make these like strange mental connections, but it's all rushed and it was crammed and it could have been better. And I wish I'd had more time to do versions 2, 3, 4, 5 of it and then choose the best one. As it is, the version that's in that track was the one I recorded in that small gap, because I knew that's all the time I had. So time is hard to get, right? But maybe as we approach the end of careers, maybe we've got kids have grown up a bit. They're not quite as demanding. You're winding down what you're doing, develop a bit more time there. Now it's time to think about, pursuing your dreams and your goals, and, don't ever not do it. Otherwise you'll look back and maybe you'll regret it. So just go for it and make the time.
I've got the name for one of your next tracks. I think you could call it Snatched Moments. I think that's a great song. You'll have to do that. Tell us about the albums and the EPs that you've released so far.
Yes. So I guess unlike bands of old that used to go into the studio, I think I said this earlier, right? Go into the studio and record an album every couple of years. So you'd spend 2 years in hiatus listening to the latest thing. I'm churning them out at a speed. And the reason is because I produce music at home. So in January this year, I released my first 10-track album called Solo. And there's a little quirk of this album. Solo was the name of the album that came to me immediately because I am a solo musician. I record everything on it myself. But then I found after recording the first 3 tracks that all of the titles began with the letter S. And I thought, well, so does the name of the album. That begins with the letter S. So I actually thought, well, why not just continue that trend? So you'll find when you come to look it up online that actually all 10 tracks begin with the letter S. And it's not hard to find tracks that begin with the letter S. So that's a little work. And that came out in January this year. Took me 2 years to record and release that end to end. Then I got faster. Then I sped up. Then my process improved. And then in 6 months, I've produced another 5-track EP, which is called It All Begins with Drums. And that came out last Monday. And when I say came out, what we mean by that these days is we distribute our digital music on all streaming services. So if you're a Spotify listener, iTunes, Apple, Deezer, Pandora, Amazon Music, all of these platforms carry that album and those songs. So you can simply type it into your search bar and look it up in all those platforms. So it all begins with drums, came out last Monday. It's doing well. I'm getting a good positive social reception to that. And then I'm about one track away, I think I mentioned earlier on, from completing my next EP. So you have to have these things kind of queued up in the background. This means you are spinning a lot of plates, right? So you're juggling one that you've just released and one that you're still recording and another one you're planning and somewhere down the line. But the idea, because we live in an on-demand age now, is that you need to keep fulfilling your audience's needs for new material or new content, as they call it now. So I'm about one track away from finishing my next EP, which will be called The Watcher. That's the title track of the album as well. There's 5 tracks on that. And that one, I think, it's up to me when I release it. This is the beauty of doing it all yourself, right? I can release that in maybe about 4 weeks, 6 weeks time when there's a bit of a gap and a bit of a hiatus. And then, of course, I'll be thinking creatively about what next. So it's like a bit of an addiction. It keeps feeding itself. What next? What next? What next? So yeah, they're the three albums. 2 are out now. 1 will follow in about 4 weeks' time.
Well, this has been a really interesting conversation, Ben. For anyone who wants to follow the journey, we'll have links to socials and your music on the show notes. And to everyone joining us today, thank you for being part of Undercurrent Stories. If this episode resonated with you, please do share it with someone who might need to hear it. You never know who's sitting in a dream they haven't quite themselves permission to chase yet. So until next time, this is Bob from Undercurrent Stories, and thank you for coming on the show, Ben.
Oh, thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.